as Secretary Kristi Noem must resign or face impeachment. I don't know.
Right immediately after Omar called for ICE to be abolished and for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to resign or be impeached, 55-year-old Anthony James Kazmierzak stood up and sprayed her with an unknown liquid from a large syringe. Also, he reportedly yelled that Omar needs to resign, and right now, while we don't know what the liquid is yet, one BBC journalist in the room said it had a sour smell like a chemical, the New York Times reporting that it smelled like vinegar. And while you had many, happy that there weren't any injuries, you had many kind of amazed by the response. Omar looking like she was going to punch the guy for a second. Also, she refused security's efforts to move her off stage to safety after the man was taken into custody. But she then went back to speaking, and as she was leaving, she told reporters at the event, "I survived war, and I'm definitely going to survive intimidation and whatever these people think that they can throw at me because I'm built that way." And then after, she went on Twitter to say, "I'm okay. I'm a survivor, so this small agitator isn't going to intimidate me from doing my work. I don't let bullies win." And while right now we're trying to learn more about this guy and his motive, it does right now look like it was a premeditated attack. You have a neighbor telling the New York Post that Kazmierzak asked him to walk his dog so that he could go to Omar's event. He apparently even hinted that something was going to happen, with the neighbor saying that Kazmierzak said that he might get arrested. And then you had this neighbor going on to say that Kazmierzak has been heavily medicated from a car accident years before that messed up his spine, as well as being diagnosed with Parkinson's. You also know from the neighbor that he apparently leans conservative, and social media pages apparently belong to him show a history of supporting Trump and right-wing commentators, including Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens. I really wonder where he landed in the past year with those two. This guy has now been charged with third degree, so we'll have to wait to see what happens there. In the meantime, we've seen a mixed bag of reactions to this. You have many officials condemning the attack, speaking out against political violence. Some Democrats laying the blame for this at the feet of Donald Trump, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said, "It's not a coincidence that after days of President Trump and VP Vance putting Representative Omar in their crosshairs with slanderous public attacks, she gets assaulted at her town hall." And adding, "Thank God she is okay. If they want leaders to take down the temperature, they need to look in the mirror." And well, yeah, if you look into it, Trump has spent recent months targeting Ilhan Omar with some pretty nasty rhetoric. And in fact, yesterday, the very same day that Omar was attacked, Trump was shit-talking her while speaking in Iowa.
Not like Ilhan Omar. Did you see that wise guy? She's always talking about the Constitution provides me with the following. The Constitution, she comes from a country that's a disaster. It's considered, I think, the worst. It's not even a country.
Right, and then when he heard about this attack, he told a reporter, quote, "I think she's a fraud. I really don't think about that. She probably had herself sprayed knowing her." Now with that, on one side, you have many finding that reaction disgusting, though also some people finding it suspicious, wondering why Trump's first reaction to this was to assume that a politician would fake an attack on themselves during an election year for some political gain. But then also too, as you might imagine, this really fanned the flames of his supporters to speculate that Omar somehow staged this whole thing. So you saw people online going through the video and saying that she nodded at the guy before he attacked, or saying that, she didn't react the way that she should have if she was attacked, so it must be fake. And all of this is, we know that this woman has faced increased death threats since Trump took office again and started making some insane claims about her, including that she's now worth more than $40 million. Which, just to explain where he's getting that number, in her financial disclosures from last spring, Omar valued her husband's venture capital management firm and his winery is worth between $5 million and $25 million and between $1 million and $5 million respectively. So at the very top range of those numbers is where Trump and co, they're getting the worth $44 million thing. But as Forbes pointed out, even if those businesses were operating at the tippity top of those ranges, that's still not accurate for how much Omar or even her husband's worth. And in fact, you had her late last year explaining that her husband is a partner in those ventures, and the numbers that she included are the business's total value, not just the value of his ownership stake. Though also with that, it is worth noting that she's been at the center of a Justice Department investigation since the Biden days, specifically focused on her finances with a foreign citizen. Well, reportedly, it looks like things have stalled on that front due to there being a lack of evidence. In recent weeks, GOP members of the House, they've been threatening to open their own investigation into Omar as a way of connecting her to the Minnesota fraud scandal, especially after evidence revealed that some members of Minnesota's Somali community set up companies to bill state agencies for social services that were never provided. But I'll say at this point, there's no evidence to connect Omar herself to any fraud scheme, and her office has reportedly received no official inquiries from the Oversight Committee or the Trump DOJ. And so as it stands now, it's a political violence with their aggressive rhetoric. But also, despite these relentless verbal attacks and even physical attacks on Minnesota's elected representatives, Tuesday, it was actually a good day for Democrats, at least in one way, because they actually won 2 seats in the Minnesota State House after special elections yesterday. And it was significant not because it was surprising, actually, these were both deep blue districts. In fact, the Democrat was the only candidate on the ballot for one of them, but rather because it restores the even partisan split in the House there with 67 Democrats and 67 Republicans. And that helps them a lot because the Senate Democrats already have a slim majority, and of course you have Tim Walz, the Democratic governor. And so while they'll still need some Republican support to pass things, they can at least use the power that they have to resist the federal invasion. Even if that just means things like holding hearings to spotlight what the feds are doing there as a state Senate subcommittee is set to do this week. Also on that note, the two agents who used their guns on Alex Preddy have reportedly been put on administrative leave. Right? Because before this, CBP said that they were just still out in the field, just not in Minneapolis. Now DHS, they say this move is standard procedure and it shouldn't be viewed as suspicion of wrongdoing. But still, 5 days after the shooting, the identities of the agents haven't been released, and despite all the talk about some agents leaving Minnesota with Greg Bovino, it's far from clear that Trump's troopers are actually pulling out at all. Because you have people like Ken Klippenstein revealing that he's obtained a Border Patrol memo saying that federal deployment to Minneapolis is steady state and expected to continue as planned. You also had Trump himself clarifying yesterday that whatever he's doing, it is not a pullback.
We're going to de-escalate a little bit, but I don't think it's a pullback. It's a little bit of a change. Everybody in this room that has a business, you make little changes. Bovino is very good, but he's a pretty out there kind of a guy, and in some cases that's good. Maybe it wasn't good here.
And almost all of the headlines have focused on the "we're gonna de-escalate a bit" part. Everything that he says after that, it's that he's just maybe haven't seen evidence of de-escalation. In fact, if anything, we're seeing the opposite. I mean, we're seeing things we didn't even know to expect. There's video now showing ICE agents trying to get inside the Ecuadorian consulate, which, just to be clear, it is, I guess you'd call it a big no-no. Like, international law and obvious norms, though norms don't matter, generally prohibit law enforcement authorities from entering foreign consulates or embassies without permission. And so in the video, you see a staffer running to the door to turn the agents away, telling them this is the Ecuadorian consulate, you're not allowed to enter. And then you can hear one of the agents respond by threatening to grab the staffer if he touched the agent. Though they then eventually left, and the consulate later posted that it ensured the protection of the Ecuadorians who were present at the time, adding that it activated the emergency protocols and filed a note of protest with the U.S. Embassy in Ecuador so that similar attempts are not made on other consulates. But also, this chaos, it's not just happening in Minnesota, it's ongoing in other parts of the country as well. Where you have authorities saying that a suspect sought in connection with an alleged human trafficking incident was shot during an exchange of gunfire with Border Patrol yesterday. That man in serious but stable condition with no officers hurt. And now, while that incident's under investigation, you also have people looking for accountability for all the lies that were told with Alex Preddy. And currently, the conversation inside of the White House seems to be focused on one big question. Who is to blame? Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, Greg Bovino, or someone else entirely? Because according to Axios, some officials blame the CBP officers on the ground for creating an initial report that left them with the belief that Preddy had brandished a gun. And that, even though we all saw with our own eyes with those videos that is just not true. And in fact, Border Patrol itself has now backed off of that claim in the mandatory notice that it has to provide to Congress anytime someone dies in its custody. Or with them claiming after their investigation that after agents tried to detain Preddy, he resisted, they struggled, one agent yelled he's got a gun, and two Border Patrol officers fired Glock pistols. But that report makes no mention of Preddy brandishing his own gun or of the agents firing it themselves, accidentally or otherwise. But either way, right, what most people are focused on is what DHS posted in its now infamous press statement on Twitter just a couple of hours after the shooting, and it was also something that was echoed almost verbatim by Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino. In fact, some people might not have noticed this, but if you play them side by side, they are clearly just reading a script.
An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently.
Resisted.
Both of them just lying on this man's name, claiming that Preddy intended to cause maximum damage and massacre federal agents. Now, Axios, they report that the White House officials who never signed off on that statement, they're frustrated. One source saying that some people tried to clean up the statement before it was sent, but it had already been disseminated. But still, one of those in the know appeared to be Stephen Miller, because he posted his own comment just minutes later calling Preddy an assassin, which was also reposted by J.D. Vance. And in fact, one source told Axios that immediately following the shooting, Stephen Miller heard gun and knew what the narrative would be. Preddy came to massacre cops. And so if you believe that account, then everything just flowed from there, with a person recalling that Noem told them, everything I've done at the direction of the president and Stephen. Because while technically, since Miller is just the deputy chief of staff, his official title, Noem outranks him as cabinet secretary, practically, Miller's real power far outstrips his official title and reportedly includes de facto oversight of Noem. And personally, I think Stephen Miller is the one that's been running things. That's why I call him President Stephen Miller. Donald Trump's kind of just his empty vessel, his hammer. But with this, you had Miller himself pointing his finger back at CBP, saying that any early comments that were made were based on what it sent to the White House. And that is, you had another source blaming Greg Bovino for feeding misinformation to officials in D.C. Then, with all this, we have people outside of the White House arguing the whole blame game, it misses where the real guilt ultimately lies: President Donald Trump. Because not only was he reportedly kept apprised of the DHS press statement by Miller and Noem's top advisor, Corey Lewandowski, he also is the man at top who created all of the conditions for this to happen. And so much of the mainstream conversation around this is, who will get to be his fall guy, if anyone. Right? It's a classic authoritarian tactic. Supreme leader is safe and he just moves pieces, removes pieces. And of course, don't forget that he joined the maligning of the first Minnesota civilian who was killed, Renee Good. And I'll also add there that since the Preddy shooting, he has hardly modified his stance. Yesterday, you had him calling the shooting unfortunate, but also seeming to at least partially blame Preddy for exercising his Second Amendment right to carry a firearm.
I don't like that he had a gun. I don't like that he had 2 fully loaded magazines. That's a lot of bad stuff.
Trump then also repeated something similar elsewhere, saying, quote, you can't have guns. You can't walk in with guns. Can't walk into this. You can't do that. With him then also saying that he feels worse about Renee Good than he does with Alex Preddy because Good's parents are apparently Trump fans.
And I'm not sure about his parents, but I know her parents were big Trump fans. Makes me feel bad anyway, but I mean, I guess you could say even worse. They were tremendous Trump people, Trump fans.
As far as the reaction to Trump's seemingly anti-2A comments, you had the NRA coming out with one of the most lukewarm statements I have ever seen from them, saying, while not referencing Trump or any specific incident, the NRA unequivocally believes that all law-abiding citizens have a right to keep and bear arms anywhere they have a legal right to be. Whereas, of course, if like a Biden or Obama said this, it would be like you'd have 15 emails in your inbox, we're under attack, like all caps Twitter posts, but that double standard. In Iowa, he then let loose another barrage of attacks on immigrants.
We have brought down crime very substantially in Minnesota. We've taken out thousands of hard criminals, hardened, vicious, horrible criminals. 2% of the population causes 90% of the crime. So when you start decimating that 2%, boom.
Though just to be clear here, available data shows that the vast majority of people arrested by ICE in recent months, they have no criminal offenses, and a very small fraction actually committed violent crimes. But still, you have Trump and his allies continuing to paint this crackdown as a restoration of law and order that is targeting the worst of the worst. And you're seeing that argument not just coming from people like Nick Fuentes or Jesse Waters, but even folks like Ben Shapiro. Or with Shapiro just releasing a video called "Are We Headed Towards Civil War?" in which he claims that the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy were the result of obstruction from protesters and rhetoric from Democrats.
This is a left-wing chaos operation. The Insurrection Act is not new. It's not even all that unusual. When President Eisenhower sent troops into Little Rock to enforce Brown versus Board, the left called him a civil rights hero. But when President Trump threatens to use the Insurrection Act, the left calls him a fascist dictator who is conspiring to destroy our republic. Give me a break.
But also, speaking of fascist dictators conspiring to destroy our republic, Trump's FBI announced today that it's executing a search warrant at an election office in Fulton County, Georgia. With the source telling CNN that it's related to the Trump DOJ's efforts to seize election records in search of voter fraud. Or because Fulton County is home to Atlanta and it swung for Biden by a large margin in 2020. And that led to the now infamous phone call where you had Trump trying to pressure the state's top election officials to overturn the results in his favor.
We think that if you check the signatures, a real check of the signatures going back in Fulton County, you'll find at least a couple of 100,000 of forged signatures. Look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Now, with this whole situation last month, you had the Justice Department Civil Rights Division suing Fulton County, seeking to force officials to turn over ballots from the 2020 election. But the judge in the case actually hasn't made a ruling yet, so apparently the FBI's just decided to pounce away. You've got a spokesperson for the county telling The Guardian that officials there, they're scrambling to understand the nature and target of the search. But also, Georgia's not the only state that Trump's going after, right? His DOJ, they've sued several others for their voter data, and judges have tossed a few of those cases out, most recently this week in Oregon. So with the midterms coming up this November, we're gonna have to wait to see how this plays out. Also, will Trump's goons stop in Georgia, or will they go much, much further, and what happens there? And then there's more we've got to dive into in just a minute, but first let me thank a sponsor and say, you ever download a game just to try it and suddenly you're up at 2 o'clock in the morning planning boss fights like it's your second job? That's what happened when I picked up this game because it dropped one of the coolest crossovers I've seen. Today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, has teamed up with Assassin's Creed, and 5 legendary assassins are now playable. Ezio, Edward Kenway, Bayek, Basim, and Cassandra. And get this, you can unlock Ezio for free just by logging in for 7 days. Limited time thing, don't sleep on it. Insanely faithful. Animations, weapons, everything like, they just walk straight out of the AC games. Ezio can stack nasty debuffs and then slice through defenses with a hidden blade, feeling very assassiny. Plus, there's a new event dungeon with Pontiff, Augustin, special gear rewards, and more ways to earn the other assassins through events and tournaments. And if you jump it in, download using my link or QR code, and you'll get 3 legendaries and 1 epic for free. Legendary Narma, the Return, right from the start. Epic Yugo after reaching level 15. Legendary Champion of your choice by picking 1 promo code out of 6 that you see on the screen. And log in 7 days to claim Ezio. Keep logging in, grab gear, simple. So hey, grab raid today, use one of the promo codes, build your squad, and come find me in game. Then getting back into the news, more news you need to know. Russia has now suffered more casualties in Ukraine than in any conflict it's been a part of since World War II. And that's just one reason that experts are arguing that Putin, he's just captaining a sinking ship and that his victory, it is far from inevitable. But Ukraine, they're hurting too, right? Talks have yet to yield real results, and the Kremlin, they've got a lot of dirty tricks in their bag. And so there's a lot that we've got to unpack together. Where we're going to start are with the talks that took place over the weekend between Russian, Ukrainian, and American officials. Right? They were the first involving all three countries at once, and initially, they kind of seemed to go weirdly well. You had Zelensky saying on social media that more meetings would be held provided there is a readiness to move forward. You had the Kremlin apparently agreeing, saying that talks would resume next week, and you also had Zelensky saying that a U.S. document on security guarantees for Ukraine was 100% ready, and that it's now just a matter of picking a time and a place for it to be signed, saying the document will then be sent for ratification to the U.S. Congress and the Ukrainian Parliament. But then the cracks started to show. You had the Financial Times reporting that the U.S. told Ukraine that they'd have to sign a peace deal with Russia before getting security guarantees and that any deal would involve giving up land. But then Reuters spoke to a source who claimed that the U.S. wasn't trying to force Ukraine into territorial concessions. So ultimately, it appears that this continues to be the question that could just screw up any chance of an agreement. Right, the Kremlin, they reportedly said on the deal that it said that Trump agreed to in Alaska over the summer, which would involve Ukraine handing over parts of the country that Russia hasn't been able to capture even after 4 years of war. But then you have Zelensky, who has consistently said that Ukraine's territorial integrity must be upheld in any peace deal to end the war. All while you have experts at the Institute for the Study of War arguing that Putin is just using these latest talks to stall for time and stave off additional U.S. sanctions, as he's done many times before. Though, I will say here that the hope is that he may become more willing to compromise as his troops, they just continue to pay a massive, massive toll for shockingly little gain. Well, neither side has publicly disclosed comprehensive casualty figures. According to a new analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the number of Russian troops killed since the beginning of the war is around 415,000. And the number of the overall casualties, including those wounded or missing, that's around 1.2 million people, which, like I said, is more than any conflict Russia's been a part of since World War II. I mean, it's more than 17 times greater than Soviet losses in Afghanistan during the 1980s, 11 times greater than during Russia's first and second Chechen wars, and 5 times greater than all Russian and Soviet wars combined since the Second World War. And with all that, while Russia now occupies around 20% of Ukraine, it's been advancing at a snail's pace for more than a year. I mean, since the start of 2024, they have reportedly only taken another 1.5% of Ukraine's territory, advancing at an average rate of between 15 and 70 meters per day in their most high-profile offenses. That is slower than almost any major offensive campaign in any war in the last century, which is why with that you have one of the authors of the study saying, Russia's poor battlefield performance in Ukraine and declining economic productivity indicates that Russia is in serious decline as a major power. And adding, while Russia still possesses nuclear weapons and a large military, it is no longer a great power in most military, economic, or science and technological categories. But of course, one of the big things here is even if Russia's getting weaker, Ukraine's not doing so hot either. With the center estimating that between 100,000 and 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died so far, which puts Ukraine's overall casualty number at around 600,000, and then actually combined, the total is 1.8 million, which apparently means we're on track for more than 2 million by spring. But also, despite Russia bearing the brunt of that, its troops still outnumber Ukrainians and fighting by almost 3 to 1. And that's in addition to Russia, of course, having a bigger population to draw from to replenish their ranks. In fact, Russia has seemingly kept its troop levels pretty much steady throughout the war, though to do so, they've had to kind of pull out all the stops. Russia's had to carry out its first draft since World War II, and it's also offering massive financial incentives to almost anyone who will enlist. So in one region, for example, you can apparently get $50,000 in bonuses, which is more than twice the average annual income in the region. And then in addition to that, we know as many as 15,000 North Korean troops have fought alongside Russian forces. In fact, citizens of Nepal, Kenya, South Africa, and Iraq are among those who have taken part, though some have reported being tricked into coming to Russia by trafficking groups offering jobs. Also, there have been reports that raids have been carried out in areas where migrants typically live or work in order to pressure them into military service. And actually, in November, you had Putin making it so that military service is mandatory for certain foreigners seeking permanent residency, while laws have also been adopted offering fast-track Russian citizenship for enlistees. So with all that, when an independent Russian news site, together with a BBC and some volunteers, collected the names of over 160,000 troops killed, they found that more than 550 were foreigners from over 24 countries. Right? And that is, any troop that wants out might face a worse fate. There's a video going around right now that alleges to show 2 men who have been tied to trees and tortured for deserting and failing to follow orders. And while that specific clip hasn't been independently verified, it is consistent with some other reporting that we've seen from independent Russian media. And speaking of alleged Russian crimes, you actually just had a Russian drone hitting a Ukrainian Ukrainian passenger train with more than 200 people on board. You've got the authorities reporting afterward that they found fragments of 5 bodies, and Zelensky has condemned the attack as an act of terrorism. Also, strikes on the southern port city of Odessa reportedly killed 3 people and injured dozens more. And in the Kyiv region, they killed 2 people, a couple, leaving their 4-year-old child injured and orphaned. And all of that, of course, is millions have been left without heating, electricity, and water because of Russian attacks targeting energy infrastructure. And then also, I mean, even beyond all that, there are these ways that Russia's trying to wear down Ukraine that we don't see. One of them being how it's recruiting teenagers for acts of sabotage. But Ukrainian officials have reportedly identified around 1,400 sabotage operations linked to Russian intelligence services over the past 2 years, including 800 in 2025, and a quarter of those who were arrested, they were below the age of 18. And many of those teens were reportedly recruited by Russian intelligence agencies through messages on Telegram and other social media channels. And so one of these people, for example, they were offered $2,500 just to pick up a package and drop it off at a police station, but inside was an explosive. And that, as it turns out, was actually built by 4 local boys between the ages of 14 and 16. But luckily, the authorities handled the situation before it was detonated. Now, with all that said, the Russian authorities have also alleged that many teens there have been recruited to carry out acts of sabotage as well, but they've rarely offered evidence. And so ultimately, that's kind of a snapshot of where we are right now. We're gonna have to see where it goes. But then the last thing I want to talk about today, it's been very interesting to look at and also look at the fallout here. Candace Owens just leaked some audio. And it's audio that's had a lot of people online saying that Erica Kirk sounds thrilled to be profiting off of her husband's death. Because Candace shared a clip of what she claims is Erica speaking to TPUSA staff following Charlie's memorial just under 2 weeks after he died. And in this clip, it sounds like she's thanking them for their work during the event, discussing the future of TPUSA, and it's gotten more and more attention because Candace and a ton of others have listened to that and said, it sounds like Erica's a little happier than you might assume.
I don't even know where to begin. The fact that we were able to pull off an event of a century, it's just insane. We had over 275,000 people that attended, and the stadium overflow. I think we're at over 200,000 for merch sales. Again, it's not easy, but it's hard. Otherwise, honestly, Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action, full steam ahead, you guys. Charlie would want us to get back to work, and that's what we're doing. We have so much to do, which is exciting. Charlie in heaven is like, you guys thought you had a busy schedule then, just you wait. And he's doing some awesome things with Jesus in heaven right now, but there's so much work to be done. I mean, since his assassination, we have 100,000 chapter requests. We have 300,000 new donors. I think we have 50,000 plus hat orders to fulfill.
And Candace's reactions to Erica's tone here was,
it is the general tone that is off-putting. It's the laughter that is off-putting. It's, again, we are not even 2 weeks after watching your husband be assassinated. In my imagination, I just thought she would be more upset.
What you've seen is a lot of people, both in and out of her audience, agreeing with Candace's take, slamming Erica for sounding so excited and happy about merch sales in the wake of her husband's murder, writing things like, I can't imagine sounding like this 11 days after my husband was just publicly executed. No way I would be thinking about merch sales. But then also with this, understand you had plenty of people defending Kirk, saying, everyone grieves differently and this didn't feel weird to them. And others saying that, if anything, it shows that Erica is stepping up as CEO of TPUSA, and the audio sounded like a normal business meeting. And with that, you also saw a lot of people taking aim at Candace, including one user who wrote, I find it disgusting that Candace Owens keeps going after Erica. Erica obviously wants Charlie's legacy to grow, and saying she is doing what he would have wanted her to. She will carry on. Many also accusing Candace of being hypocritical, saying she herself has been profiting off of Kirk's death by posting countless videos milking his assassination, spreading conspiracy theories in the wake of his death, and going after his widow. For now, we'll have to continue to see how this plays out in the court of public opinion, as obviously, for months now, we've seen right-wingers kind of going after each other on different things, as well as to wait and see if TPUSA pushes back against Candace here, right? Because so far, they've kind of been pretty selective about what they respond to when it comes to her. But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is where your Wednesday Philip DeFranco Show dive into the news is going to end. Well, of course, I'll see you right back here tomorrow with another daily dive into the news. There's more you can watch right now, because I also just uploaded today's brand new podcast, Crashing Out with myself and Alex Perlman. I think we get the Don't Tread on Me flag now, because apparently they didn't fucking believe it.
I want it, just real fast. I'm getting revved now. I did.
Sometimes you go to places and you're like, oh, they invented bigotry here.
I have not said anything else that I can't prove in court. She made a movie with a man whose picture's in the Epstein files, and it's not her husband. Nobody gives a shit.
What about you come to Georgia? We go to the screening this Friday. We do a movie review.